Welcome, dear listeners, to the Carolina Haints podcast, brought to you by Wreak Havoc Productions and A Darker World. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. Everyone knows about the Salem witch trials. The mere mention of the name brings to mind one of America's most notorious cases of mass hysteria. Between February 1692 and May 1693, 20 men, women, and children were executed, 19 of them by hanging. Another 5 people died in prison, including 2 infants who were born to accused witches while in prison. The babies were left to starve in the cells after their mother's executions. But what do you know about the witch trials of Hartford, or Fulda, or North Berwick? Witchcraft is as old as history itself, and witch trials have been around for as long as people have believed in witches. The earliest recorded instance was in France in 503 AD. The first witch put to death in America was Elsie Young, 50 years before the Salem witch trials in 1647. She was the first of 80 people put to death in Connecticut during the years leading up to the Salem witch trials. But mankind's intelligence is one of the things that sets us apart as a dominant species, our ability to learn from our mistakes. So you would think that by 1792, a full 100 years after the Salem witch trials, we'd have learned our lesson. Apparently not. In 1792, the folks of Fairfield County, South Carolina, became alarmed when cattle began to mysteriously die in the area. The illness affected many of the local residents, causing them to behave erratically. 4 residents of the town of Winnsboro were accused of witchcraft. A woman named Mary Engelman was believed to be the coven leader. Very soon, strange accusations began to surface about Mary. She had allegedly killed a cow by levitating it and then slamming it back to the ground, breaking its neck. Others believed that she was a shapeshifter and that she stalked her intended victims in the guise of a huge panther. One man claimed that she turned him into a horse and rode him into a meeting of witches in the woods where Satan himself was in attendance. Thomas Hill was a prominent landowner in the area, and as such, had the most to lose from the ailing cattle. On his orders, the women were kidnapped and brought to the farm where a lynch mob quickly found them guilty. Hill appointed John Crossland to be the witches' torturer and executioner. The women were tied up and flogged severely. Then they were held with their feet to the fire until their souls, quote, popped off. There are conflicting reports about what happened next. Some say that the women were then set free. Others say that after the women were burned, some members of the mob had a change of heart and intervened on their behalf. A third version of the story say that several attempts were made to execute the women, but they survived every one, even hanging. Mary Engelman died of old age, but not before bringing John Crossland to court. He was found guilty of aggravated assault and fined an amount equal to $125 in today's money. In North Carolina, things were different, much different. Just a few years after the Salem witch trials in 1703, Thomas Bouthier brought Susanna Evans to court. He claimed that she caused the death of his wife by means of witchcraft. Of course, during this time in history, being accused of witchcraft was a very serious charge. Salem's residents were mostly Puritans from England, die-hard religious fanatics, that live by the letter of the Scripture. Exodus chapter 22, verse 18. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. North Carolina, on the other hand, was populated by people from all over the European countries, and as such, was more tolerant of the old ways. After just short deliberation, Susanna Evans was acquitted of all charges. The official verdict was, quote, ignoramus, written in all caps across the front of the official record. North Carolina had another witch accusation in 1706. Walter Tanner filed court documents declaring that Mary Rooks was a witch. After a trial, Rooks was also acquitted, and her accuser, Walter Tanner, was fined 5 shillings plus court fines. Long before Europeans set foot in America, it's said that even Native Americans had witch hunts of their own. Most people believe that the Indian nations embraced magic and witchcraft, given their belief in shamanism. But they considered the two to be very different from each other. The shaman rituals included interacting with the spirit world and harmonizing with nature, while they believed witches would call upon their power for personal gain or to harm others. The shaman's ritual involved interacting with the spirit world and harmonizing with nature, while they believed witches would call upon the power for personal gain or to harm others. Most Native American tribes would execute any witch they found among them. The Church and School of Wicca was founded in New Bern, North Carolina, in 1968. It was the first church to be officially recognized by the government as Wiccan in the U.S. However, there does not seem to be any direct correlation between the modern Wiccan movement and the alleged powers of the witches that were executed between 1400 and 1800. Modern Wicca is an attempt to reconstruct the Celtic pagan practices of ancient times, even though there are no surviving manuscripts or records from that era. Modern Wicca can trace its roots from the fraternal esoteric movement that began in the late 1800s. Secret societies began to form around the world, and as they grew in strength and numbers, became increasingly more difficult to remain secret. The best-known organization of the time was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, led by Samuel Mathers. The infamous Aleister Crowley was a member of the Golden Dawn, until he very publicly split with the organization and formed the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Order of the Temple of the East, taking many prominent Golden Dawn members with him. Ironically, a few years later, a member of his organization did the same thing to him, when L. Ron Hubbard formed the Church of Scientology. These organizations set the foundation, and in the 1950s, modern Wicca movement came into its own with the publication of several books by people like Charles Leland, Margaret Murray, and Gerald Gardner. It's impossible to know the exact number of people who have been executed for witchcraft over the years, but scholars estimate the number to be between 40 and 50,000. A new memorial dedicated to the victims of the Salem witch trials opened in the summer of 2017 on the site of the original hangings. To learn more about witch trials, check out Studies in Philology, Witchcraft in North Carolina by Tom Pete Cross. Also check out ReceiptBook.com's article, Witch of Winnsboro. check out candidslice.com, gocarolines.com, and ncpedia.org. You can also find out more from the website religioustolerance.org. Carolina Haints is a production of Wreak Havoc Productions and A Darker World. This episode was researched and written by Jeff Cochran. You can find everything that he's up to at his website at adarkerworld.com. You can find everything that we're up to at our company, Wreak Havoc Productions, at wreakhavocproductions.com. You can find Carolina Haints on iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube. Please consider contributing to all our endeavors at Patreon. Just visit our page at patreon.com/wreakhavoc. Feel free to email me with any comments, questions, or concerns you might have at wreakhavocproductions@gmail.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. Tune in then to hear more about the things that go bump in the night.